He's only the finest journalist in the English-speaking world and at the head of the finest news outfit, the wonderful and irreplaceable Grey Zone News. And he's very generous with us, with his time, as he is again tonight. The great Max Blumenthal. Welcome back, Max. Well, it's quite the night down in Florida. There's been a lot of murky things happened down there. How do you rate the current movie that we're watching with Trump and Zelensky there now?
You know, I've been paying attention to the U.S. troop formations in Florida that are directed against Venezuela more than I've been paying attention to the negotiations in Miami. I mean, I think the Russian delegation's playing it right. They're appealing to Trump's transactional side. But I just have come to expect nothing from any of these negotiations, and I've just kind of concluded that this war will be decided on the battlefield, as so many past conflicts, most recently Syria was. And Marco Rubio is one reason for that. He keeps changing the framework so that it's impossible for Russia to agree, especially at a point where Russia's winning. And Marco Rubio has been responsible for the worst foreign policy blunders of the Trump administration. And yet he has the highest approval rating of any Trump official, according to a recent Gallup poll. He's at 41% because the media protects him. Remember, Secretary of State Rubio was confirmed 99-0 by the US Senate, including by Bernie Sanders. And it's Rubio who is behind this entire Venezuela debacle, which could soon turn into a hemispheric catastrophe, humanitarian catastrophe, military catastrophe, insurgency, civil war, more mass migration. Rubio has set the stage for all of it, and Trump is too mentally enfeebled to really right the ship, whether it's on Ukraine or with Venezuela, to literally turn back the ships like the USS Gerald Ford.
Well, let's start with Venezuela because you'll be familiar as a young father of two beautiful kids with the nursery rhyme, The Grand Old Duke of York, who had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill, only to march them down again. Isn't that the most likely outcome of what Trump has done? He cannot possibly imagine he can invade and subdue the mighty revolutionary forces of Venezuela across an area 3 times the size of Vietnam, and as Garland Nixon said, composed of jungles and mountains with jungles. Ideal territory for a guerra prolongada and one that the Americans would not win.
No, they have no idea what they're doing in the Trump administration with Venezuela. And you can see that they're constantly discarding tactics for new ones that reveal their ultimate agenda: straightforward, imperial resource theft. But to get there, they need to depose the government, and they need to find a sympathetic leader who will either negotiate on their terms or simply open up the entire country. That would be the plan of Maria Corina Machado, who has just won the Nobel War Prize in Oslo. She's the radical Venezuelan opposition leader backed by the US government for decades as she plotted coups. And now she's on the outside in exile. And she considers herself the heir to the throne of the Bolivarian Revolution and has put forward a plan to hand over $1.7 trillion in Venezuelan assets, oil, minerals, shoreline, infrastructure, to Trump's cronies. That might be very enticing to Trump, but I don't actually think the Trump administration takes her seriously. I think they have to understand that Maria Corina Machado wasn't even the biggest figure in the US-backed Venezuelan opposition, that she didn't even hold the most seats in the National Assembly through her party. She was the radical fringe, actually, of the opposition, and that they probably are seeking some kind of deal within the fold of Chavistas. But the problem is they can't get past the Venezuelan military, which has stood rock solid with Nicolas Maduro and with the Bolivarian constitution, which holds that Venezuela's resources are its own and will be used to fund social programs instead of simply given away to the highest foreign bidder. And that means that they can't install some figure in place of Nicolas Maduro who doesn't have the trust of the military, which means there's nothing they can do here other than some kind of invasion, which is also off limits, which is why they've resorted to stealing oil tankers. And I don't think that's a viable strategy for strangling the Venezuelan economy, because the economy has diversified so much over the past 4 or 5 years or longer, and Venezuela's drawing a lot of revenue through the export of its minerals, iron, ore, gold, these kinds of things. So oil isn't the only source of economic revenue for Venezuela. So the Trump administration's running out of tools. They have announced a 2-month quarantine around Venezuela in which no oil will supposedly get out, which costs the U.S. taxpayers a lot of money. And eventually the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier is going to have to be rotated out. So I actually think Nicolas Maduro has shown steadfastness and calm and projected confidence. He hasn't fallen into the trap of getting into a war of words with Trump or portraying himself as a kind of Che Guevara style guerrilla leader. And he is firmly entrenched in Miraflores. And I don't think the Trump administration knows exactly what to do after this oil tanker theft. They've already failed on the drug boats, and it's created a political fiasco inside Washington. And what's fascinating for me to watch, George, is how the Democrats have solidly lined up against this war after years and years of them supporting all of these regime change plots and giving Juan Guaido a standing ovation in Congress. Now the Democrats, I would assume for opportunistic partisan reasons, are putting up real resistance to this, and the American public is completely against it as well. Over 70% oppose this.
Whatever became of Juan Guaido is a question leaping into everyone's mind now. If you know, do tell us. But the seizing of oil tankers will have to end at the point that an oil tanker escorted by the Russian or Chinese Navy, or perhaps both, are escorting the tanker. This too is a wasting asset, this seizure, piracy on the high seas, isn't it?
It is. And we've seen the Bello 1, which was an unsanctioned tanker delivering oil to China, presumably purchased by Chinese buyers, attempt to be boarded by the Coast Guard, but the Bella kept moving, sending out emergency signals, and the Coast Guard was unable to take the tanker, as far as I know. So at that point, they'd have to, go full Houthi and actually strike the oil tanker to stop it from moving. And the United States isn't ready to go there. But look, they're going after unsanctioned tankers. It's just straight up piracy. And this is aimed at China. And we're waiting for, I'm waiting for a Chinese response, at least on the world stage, at least maybe at the UN Security Council, as well as a Russian response. And by the way, I have the answer on Juan Guaido.
Now, speaking...
He's
actually... We'll all be looking him up. The last I heard, he was a student at a polytechnic in Florida. I hope he wasn't able to take all that stolen gold from the Bank of England. But speaking of pirates, they used to say the Somalis were the pirates. But of course, they were only unshaven pirates. The shaved pirates in pressed uniforms were us. But the Somali imbroglio just got even deeper, didn't it? With the recognition of so-called Somaliland by Netanyahu, the only suitor in the world ready to openly cavort with the breakaway statelet. And this evening, Israel is at work in the Berbera airfield, airbase, hardening the shelters, lengthening the runway. Surely that's not going to be able to stand, is it?
Well, it reveals what a joke this entire project is. I mean, when so many more nations recognize a Palestinian state than Somaliland, and Israel comes in, it will discredit the cause of Somaliland as an independent nation because Israel's the ultimate pariah state, and it sets Somaliland on the course of conflict with other regional partners of Turkey and other powerful states that are not aligned with Israel. This is understood most directly as an attempt for Israel to find a kind of third party where it can ethnically cleanse Palestinian refugees from Gaza and essentially dump them the way that the UK attempted to do with migrants to Rwanda, for example, or the way that the Trump administration dumped Venezuelan migrants in the Sikhat torture center in El Salvador. But there's enormous amounts of resistance building in Somaliland. This is what I think a lot of people don't understand. A lot of outside observers don't understand is that the Somali public across the board opposes Israel and is sympathetic to Palestinians. And there are now protests in the streets of Burao, a city in Somaliland, like growing protests with people chanting. I'm reading right now a translation of this chant. We are Mujahideen. We support Palestine. We don't want Israel. A major Muslim cleric has been arrested in Somaliland for declaring opposition to this plan. And he said, I am proud to be arrested for standing against Netanyahu. And the other reason they're doing this is because Israel is seeking a new area, and the US, I would assume, too, under Trump, a new base from which to attack Ansar Allah in Yemen and other designated enemies, because there is a US base in Djibouti, but Djibouti has a formal treaty which holds that the United States cannot launch direct attacks on any other country from that base. So they need another kind of more vassalized territory to attack places like Yemen and, maintain influence around the Red Sea.
Yeah, but it would require the compliance of so many powerful actors, not the least of which, as you rightly say, are the Somalian people themselves, and even the people in so-called Somaliland themselves. As I understand it, this is a one-clan gig. All the other clans and all the other parts of Somaliland are wholly opposed to it, but there are many others, and some of them, as Lieutenant Colonel Tony Aguilar just told us, pound for pound, just across the bay, you've got the Ansar Allah, the middleweight champions of the world. They are capable of landing rockets in Tel Aviv anytime they like. So are they really going to stand by and allow a vassal state of Israel and America to set up shop just across from them? Then there's Iran. Then there's the Sahel bloc, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Then there's Russia. Then there's China. And then, of course, there is Iran. Why would any or all of these people stay quiet while this operation was staged?
Well, they're not going to stay quiet. And that's why this is so unpopular in Somaliland, and why I think there could be even a risk of an armed insurgency if Israel sets up shop there, and why this might ultimately fail, and the peril of Israel attempting to become a regional hegemon and dominate not just the traditional areas of Greater Israel, but and it's near abroad, but the entire region, either operating through vassal state, kind of like imperial cutouts like Somaliland, or through their allies in the Epstein Accords, what are more officially known as the Abraham Accords, like the United Arab Emirates, which is kind of a vehicle for Israel power projection. And Israel is going to overextend itself in the next few years, and we're going to see a lot of rejection of the Israeli presence, because it just invites conflict whenever you allow the Israelis into your realm. It invites conflict, including with NATO members like Turkey. So I think this is doomed to fail.
Now, you mentioned a perfect segue, really, to the Epstein affair. which I know that you have followed and I have too. It's reached a kind of surreal pitch now, isn't it? That the hoax that Trump described it as is having to be redacted like a giant zebra crossing on every page. But everyone somehow knows what's there under the black lines. And what's there is that the person most exposed next to Bill Clinton, but I would argue even more exposed than Bill Clinton, is Donald Trump himself. He must have known that this sewage would eventually come down the pipe when he ran for office. It's all a bit perplexing to me.
Well, he was sending mixed messages. I mean, he deployed all of his proxies. Dan Bongino stepping down as deputy director of the FBI because he's so embarrassed by this whole debacle. Kash Patel, the FBI director, Pam Bondi, all of the kind of paid pro-Trump influencers like libs of TikTok and all of these characters you see on Twitter X who got the fake Epstein files phase 2, which contained nothing new, to create the sense that this would only implicate the Democrats and the deep state. And they strung along low IQ voters in the MAGA base who believed that, something would actually take place which would challenge power and would unravel this pedophile conspiracy. And then it turns out that as we all knew, any of us who knew about Donald Trump's well-documented history, that it didn't necessarily expose Trump for sure, but it certainly implicated Donald Trump as a very close Epstein associate. And Donald Trump has said himself that he believes that these files are phony and that they threaten to hurt, in his words, some very good people, including himself, who he sees as the best person. And so we have this massive tranche of redactions, which could easily be unredacted by anyone watching this right now by simply copying and pasting the DOJ files into a Word document or into an email. And I don't know if this had anything to do with Elon Musk's Doge cutting contracts for Adobe at the Department of Justice, but they actually did do that. They cut millions of dollars of contracts for software that is used for redactions. And now the public can see what's in them. And you have this kind of smorgasbord of allegations, which are random allegations that may actually not be true about, sexual assault and pedophilia. You had a fake document, which was a letter from Epstein to Larry Nassar, the gymnastics coach who's in prison for life for sexually abusing young female gymnasts. And yet the Department of Justice couldn't even keep control of or vet those documents in advance. And now it's all just circulating in the kind of partisan ecosystem online. And a lot of people believe them. And then there are real things that I think are of significance. Like we've learned that Jeffrey Epstein had more foreign passports under assumed names than we previously knew, which further suggests that he was some kind of intelligence asset. But none of this, the redactions themselves and the way that they could be easily unredacted, it perfectly encapsulates the shattering of Donald Trump's mystique as a president who was going to take on the deep state. And he's lost his luster among his own base. And this will have serious implications for the upcoming congressional midterms.
Yeah, exactly the point I was about to turn to. Not only has Trump blown any possibility of establishing a political dynasty, his sons, his daughters, maybe even his son-in-law. I'm sure he had an idea of Trumpism after Trump. After all, we've got Blairism after Blair. Why should you get off lightly? But the possibility of the Republicans actually losing power and then the Democrats now reinvigorated, as you said, by the Venezuela affair, actually going for nap, going for proper impeachment and removal from office. It's all turned very sour for Donald Trump, and that's beginning to be obvious with the viciousness at the base. When you've got, for example, Alex Jones launching unhinged attacks on his comrade, Candace Owens, you realize that it's all rattling down on the right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the last TPUSA AmFest was a disaster. Everybody was at each other's throats. Ben Shapiro was he was holding the banner for the pro-Trump faction, which is now the Republican establishment, which essentially is the deep state. And he didn't mention Israel once in his speech, which I thought for his own objectives was an effective speech because Ben Shapiro didn't put forward any agenda of his own. He simply critiqued Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and those who are the critics of Trump who will no longer speak to them, won't give them the time of day. Marjorie Taylor Greene was also a target of his attack, and who also have been critics of Israel and Trump's embrace of Netanyahu. And the tenor of Ben Shapiro's speech was extremely nasty, extremely angry. You could tell he was speaking on behalf of the Zionist donor class that has Trump by the short and curlies, and that they are getting desperate. And you can feel the same anger from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has just quit Congress because she was with Trump from the beginning, from the first time she erupted onto the national stage in an ad where she's holding an AR-15 assault rifle running for Congress as the ultra MAGA congresswoman from Georgia. Now she's persona non grata in the White House. Tucker, I don't know if he'd be welcomed back into the White House at this point. Candace Owens, who is close friends with Charlie Kirk, is now hated by the TPUSA leadership and the Trump administration. And so this is symbolic of them sort of losing their base, the sense among so many of the early ultra MAGA influencers that they've been stabbed in the back and betrayed, and that Donald Trump is going to ultimately release a memoir entitled Mein Schwamp because he has embraced the swamp.
Yeah, they definitely are. Now, you weren't interested really in Zelensky's visit to Florida, but tomorrow Netanyahu appears. I don't know how many times he's been to Washington in just 13 months of Trump presidency. What's he after this time, and how can they turn back the tide, which is the most welcome tide I've ever seen, which is the United States of America itself turning against Israel? What have they got up their sleeve? Have they got anything left in their locker?
Well, they've got a lot left in their locker because we keep sending them these 2,000-pound bombs and F-35s. But Netanyahu this may be Netanyahu's most decisive visit or most pivotal visit to Washington, and it's certainly his most desperate. As long as the war in Gaza raged, and there was a war in Lebanon as well, or Netanyahu could drive momentum towards a war with Iran, he felt like he had Trump under his control. But in the last several months, and since the Gaza ceasefire, which we all know isn't really a ceasefire and isn't really being enforced by Trump, but is still kind of deprived Netanyahu of some momentum, he's been frightened by what Trump is doing, particularly since Trump met with MBS. Trump's sons have set up something called World Liberty Financial, which is a crypto forum for legalized bribery. And the Saudis are pumping money from their sovereign investment fund into the Trump family. And one of the things that they have been edging Trump or influencing Trump to do is to embrace the Al-Qaeda rebranded government in Syria of Ahmed al-Sharaa, because Saudi Arabia has a lot of business interest in Syria. It wants to get involved. It's competing with Turkey. for a cut of the post-Assad carcass of Syria. And Trump has embraced al-Shara in the White House, something that really upset Netanyahu. And the Trump administration has asked Israel to reduce the pace of its attacks on Syrian territory. So I think that's going to be part of Netanyahu's agenda. He's going to try to pry Trump away from the Saudis by demanding that he not give Saudi Arabia any F-35s. In fact, Netanyahu has announced that no country in the region should have F-35s. Turkey has signed up for the F-35 program. Netanyahu has announced plans for a $100 billion domestic military program to create new military platforms and make Israel independent from countries like the United States. This is something the U.S. would not tolerate from any of the Arab monarchies, which have $1 trillion to play with. But so why would they tolerate it from Israel? Well, that's something, it's almost like a threat aimed at the U.S. And Netanyahu wants to address concerns within the White House that he is harming them politically. Axios, which is like this access journalism site that dumps information and leaks on behalf of powerful elites in the Beltway, just reported that everyone in the White House is sick of Netanyahu except for Trump, who still seems to like him. Rubio's even sick of him. Witkoff can't stand him. J.D. Vance can't stand him. I mean, we all know that. J.D. Vance was publicly humiliated on his last visit to Israel. So Netanyahu is trying to hold off trying to just at least maintain Donald Trump on his side. And I don't know if you paid any attention to the recent White House Hanukkah party, but that was a truly bizarre scene where Mark Levin, who is this Israel First radio host and Fox host, who's the voice of Netanyahu in the United States, actually wrapped his arm around Donald Trump and embraced him in a very aggressive, almost paternalistic way, and declared that Donald Trump is the first Jewish president. And I felt like there was a veiled threat there and that Donald Trump was uncomfortable. So Netanyahu is there coming to increase the pressure. I'd pay very close attention to this visit because I think it'll be pivotal for the special relationship.